I'm going to call this meeting to order from wherever you are. And I will open with our standard clause. I should say, I'm Eli Spivak. This is the Planning Sustainability Commission, and it is September 22nd, 2020. In keeping with the Oregon Public Meetings Law, statutory land use hearing requirements, and Title 33 of the Portland City Code, the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission is holding this meeting virtually. All members of the PSC are attending remotely, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to watch the broadcast of this meeting. The PSC is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, humor, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. So with that, I'd like to see if there's any items of interest from commissioners. And you can raise your real hand or your personal hand or your digital hand. All right, not seeing any. We'll pass it over to Director Durbin for a director's report.
Sounds good. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. A couple of quick items to share with you all. One is that on September 9th, the City Council unanimously passed two ordinances to ban the use of facial recognition technologies in the City of Portland. While this is not an issue that we brought to Planning Sustainability Commission, it is important work that the Bureau is doing, and I wanted to make sure we shared it with all of you. Our Smart Cities team and working closely with the Office of Equity and Human Rights have been working with Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Hardesty and a number of community-based organizations to develop these two ordinances, one of which will ban the use of this technology by city bureaus, and that went into effect immediately. It'll apply to all City of Portland bureaus and offices. And then the other one, a second ordinance, which will go into effect on January 1st, and that will ban the use of this facial recognition technology by private entities in places of public accommodation. So as defined by the state of Oregon and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is that particular ordinance is the first time that we are aware of in the world that there's been any effort to regulate the private usage of facial recognition technology. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, the reason in which we have taken this action is because it is known to be biased and racist in its use application of technology, particularly around people of color, women, and elders. So the position the city has taken, which is we need to ban the use of this technology until we have technology that actually functions and is not inherently biased. And we can always lift the ban when that technology is improved. So, and we do believe and hope that the technology industry responds to these kinds of measures and improve the technology availability. So that was a big achievement of our staff that I wanted to share. And then the second item is just to let you all know that our recruitment process for the Planning and Sustainability Commission members continues. The deadline for application is October 2nd. And Julie has organized an information session for any candidates that want to learn more about what it's like to serve on the commission. A couple of current and previous commission members will join. That is happening this Friday, September 25th from 12 to 1. And that is on the PSC website calendar. So anyone who's interested can go there and get the information and sign up. And we hope that you continue to promote these opportunities through your networks. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea, one question on the facial recognition. Will that apply to those little things, chimes they put on their doors to watch people go by if it's facing the right of way?
No, they don't apply to, they only apply to public spaces, private usage in public spaces. So private usage on the doorbell thing won't be covered, is not covered.
Even though it's facing a street potentially,
correct.
A sidewalk right there?
Yeah, because it's not ADA, it doesn't have to be ADA compliant.
Okay, I'm not sure I totally follow it, but I'll look it up later. Thank you. Any other, I guess that's complete there. I wanted to take a moment to welcome a couple of people from the Urban Forestry Commission. Thanks for joining us. If you want to put your names, write UFC next to your name, that'll help us know who you are. And we will be going to our tree code project. But before that, we've got a couple other items. So first off, consent agenda. We have the minutes from the September 8th meeting. Would someone like to make a motion to approve those?
Move approval.
Thank you, Chris. A second? I got it from Mike, I think. So all in favor of the adopting the minutes, please raise one of your hands, virtual or real. I'm going to try and keep track. It looks like it's unanimous, as it often is. So thank you, everybody. And with that, I will invite Patrick Sweeney and Ryan Curran to give us an update on the Ross Island Bridgehead project. And that's about half an hour. And then after that, we'll go to the tree code. So welcome, Patrick and Ryan.
Thank you, Eli. I'm going to share screens right now. 1 second, please. And I am not finding, let me get this set up. There it is. Share. Okay, can everybody see this title slide? I'm seeing heads nodding. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. Ryan Curran is here with, along with me, Patrick Sweeney from PBOT. We're here to talk to you about Nato Parkway Main Street and the Ross Island Bridgehead project, to provide a quick briefing for you, realizing we have a half an hour, so we're going to try to get through this quickly to allow for your questions. So we're here tonight to provide you with a quick update on related projects in the same geographic area. So the PBOT Ross Island Bridgehead Nato Main Street project, the concept plan, and then the Bureau of Planning Sustainability Nato Main Street plan. The PBOT plan for reconfiguring the Ross Island Bridgehead braid of ramps into a street network is part of the Central City package of transportation improvements in the Metro Regional Investment Measure. If the Regional Investment Measure passes, PBOT will work with neighborhood associations and project stakeholders to advance this transportation concept into design, engineering, and implementation. Ryan?
So the Nato Main Street plan that BPS will be bringing to you is a package of very limited zoning changes, some new street classifications, and some development concepts for publicly owned opportunity sites. The plan uses a racial equity lens to identify kind of what public benefits should come with this change. So we'll get into some details now. The plan's timeline is alongside PBOT's up until we plan to come to the Planning Commission and then into City Council in the spring of 2021. And there's some engagement that happens. We're about midstream in our engagement process, and we'll describe more what other opportunities there are to influence the contents of this plan.
All right.
Next slide is just some context, because the plans are highly informed by the history of this area, right? Going back from the harmful impacts from European settlers displacing Native Americans, to past auto infrastructure projects, land use regulations, urban renewal, and real estate practices that shaped the growth in South Portland for generations, right? The Chinookan and Cowlitz people were the first people in the area to inhabit it, and the first to be displaced, both physically and by disease, of European settlers. And this is a real gap in our understanding of the history that we're trying to fill actively with working with the city's director of tribal affairs. So the area, what's more known is the history of the area as, for most of the 20th century, as a large multicultural immigrant community. By 1940, over 40% of the area was foreign born. However, here are some some pictures of what was once a fairly stitched together community was really highly displaced through the South Auditorium Urban Renewal District, which displaced over 500 households and 200 businesses between 1958 and 1974. So the next slide is just a kind of a statement of the question that we're asking ourselves in our equity analysis. We're committed to ensuring that these new plans and investments redress this past harm and honor the history of South Portland as a home to Indigenous and immigrant communities. But what does that mean in practice, right? So we have an analysis underway to identify who benefited and who was burdened by this past, and how, what strategies can we deploy for more equitable outcomes, right? Specifically for how to use these publicly owned opportunity sites. How can we best use them and our zoning and land use tools to create public benefits? So we're working with Bureau equity managers, organizations like the Oregon Black Pioneers, the National University of Natural Medicine, Cedarwood School, the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, neighborhood association members, and others to go through this process over the next couple months. And next slide.
So the Rostown Bridgehead Nato Main Street project has been decades in the making and is a project that is extremely important to residents of South Portland. It will replace a remnant section of highway with a multimodal street network with pedestrian crossings, protected bike facilities, and will result in a major reduction of regional traffic that's using local streets for bridge access.
And so there's a significant amount of transportation improvement that we're responding to with the urban form, right, in our plan. So while the neighborhood will be physically reconnected by some of these improvements, we got to look at how new land uses can contribute to healthy and more connected communities, but also ones that are more inclusive, right? This is in a neighborhood with a historic district and pretty different demographics over the last couple of decades that have trended much whiter, wealthier, older, more homeowners. So as the area changes, both demographically as well as physically, we need to kind of ask, how do these transportation improvements couple with land use to create more equitable and inclusive community? That's kind of the big arc of our project.
So some of the transportation features of the Ross Island Bridgehead Nato Main Street project, as I mentioned before, it's removal of the Bridgehead braided ramps and replacing it with a multimodal street grid. And in the small diagram, if you can see my cursor, it's right around Grover and Wood Street. That's where there's a weave of ramps and over and under highway infrastructure. And that gets replaced with an at-surface grid of streets that are controlled by traffic signals. So this will help reduce regional traffic that pulses through the neighborhoods. There will be signalized intersections along Nato Parkway, of which there's none today, with pedestrian street crossings. We'll complete the Better Nato from Harrison all the way to Barber. And this number 2, number 3, actually number 3, number 4, number 5, those 3 things critically help set up Nato to become a main street instead of a highway. And then obviously the last item is, with all these improvements, it really helps the Larry Hill, Corbett, and the National University of Natural Medicine campus become much more connected into a cohesive unit. And then, so the way that this works, there's a little more detailed drawings, but in the middle of your screen, you can see where this area is shaded in green is the existing braid of ramps. There's free merge movements that happen on the eastbound. There's a movement that goes through the Corbett neighborhood. So this gets torn out and replaced with a set grid of streets. This is a couplet, and you can see all the red dots are traffic signals. And these are new traffic signals where there's none today, where there's typically high-speed merges. So these are going to be traffic signals where people can actually cross the street. There'll be bike facilities. So this transforms this area, which is fundamentally divided by highway infrastructure, and makes it into a tighter weave of neighborhood streets. So the way that that works is The changes to eastbound traffic from the south, if you're headed north on Nato Parkway, your right-hand turn to get onto the bridge eastbound is largely the same as it is today. If you're coming from I-405, you go to Arthur Street, and then what you would do now, a lot of traffic goes on Arthur and then goes up a ramp to Nato, southbound, and then goes through all these kind of curves and weaves to get onto the bridge. So this traffic would be go from Arthur onto Kelly Street, and it would remain on Kelly. And the big advantage of that is it keeps it off of Nato, and it keeps it out of, gets away from these neighborhoods. And then another key feature is I-5 northbound. That access as it curved over I-5 today curls back under Ross Island Bridge, goes up Whitaker onto Kelly. And so, in other words, this traffic from I-5 north to get onto Ross Island Bridge east goes through the Corbett neighborhood to the Kelly ramp. We're getting rid of that Kelly ramp altogether. And that is accomplished by having this I-5 northbound traffic go to Kelly, and then Kelly flows onto the bridge. So this is a significant change in reducing regional traffic out of residential neighborhoods. So westbound traffic, so that's traffic, heading westbound off the bridge. If you're going to go south, that's similar to how it is today, but it's controlled with traffic signals. The Highway 26 to Highway 26, so that's Ross Island Bridgehead heading towards I-405. That's also similar to how it is today, and that is channeled on to Kelly and then Arthur and then up towards Broadway. And then to head to downtown at a traffic signal on Nato, just head up, make a right turn, and then go north on Nato Parkway. So again, these key movements help remove the regional traffic from pulsing through these neighborhoods.
So we're proposing an urban design concept that pairs with the transportation concept that Patrick has laid out. And it's kind of thematically broken up into 4 sections. You can see the bar on your left there has along Nato, there's this North Parkway, which is better Nato improvements. There's the viaduct section in orange there that captures the viaduct. And then there's this core area in blue, which I'll give more detail about because it's the focal point of our planning. And then the South Parkway, which is green and has a similar feel to some of the better Nato improvements. Some key features that we're orienting around are these opportunity sites, both that are currently publicly owned and empty today for the most part, and then some that would be remnant parcels that are former right-of-way as a result of the realignment of the bridge. There's the historic streetcar route in yellow and some commercial corridors on First and Corbett that we're planning to complement. There's the historic district in a brown hash mark there. Light green dots indicate where the green loop connects through this area. There is, of course, the red dash line of the Southwest Corridor light rail line and a future station on Gibbs. And then the dark green dots are some of the street tree improvements. So you also may have noticed that quite a bit of the improvements circulate around one of the major institutions in the area, the National University of Natural Medicine. So that is a key partner in this, and their kind of long-term campus plan is considered central to this. And other major institutions like OHSU obviously have a major major stakeholders in this process. So we'll zoom into a couple key areas where we're making decisions, but we're not all of them. So the next slide is an example of some key sites that we're looking at.
So Nato Parkway today, as seen in the upper right, it's a highway facility for vehicles. I think you're all familiar with it, but it will be reconfigured to serve all modes with a significant set of improvements for people who walk and bike, as seen by the sketch cross-section as seen below.
So these cross sections make for such a different experience on Nato. It's so hard to imagine. But so while we're making this a place that you actually want to be, to live and to work, it also makes redevelopment possible on a handful of properties. So here's a current image of some of the blocks between Arthur and Hooker along Nato, and then a rendering above it that shows new redevelopment facing Nato, right? Having that interaction with ground floor active uses. And that's something that's pretty unimaginable today. So the next slide is just early renderings of kind of this concept that PBOT and BPS staff have been working together with community members to develop that kind of illustrates that urban and transportation diagrams that we showed. And this rendering really shows what new development could look like to complement a new Nato. And this really means planning for a couple key opportunity sites, right? I mentioned limited zoning changes and a few opportunity sites. But the big ones, I wanted to drill in and give you a taste of where we're at. So the next slide is those three big parcels that would become remnant right away if the bridgehead is realigned. And what's the vision for this, right? Council identified these sites as opportunities for affordable housing, partially mixed income, through the equitable housing strategy for the whole Southwest corridor. So we know that's a priority, but what else? We started some engagement this year, but we really paused to better understand the equity implications and opportunities. But here's where we left off. This is a concept that would have 400 to 500 units of housing. 150 or so could be affordable through a combination of direct subsidy or inclusionary housing. Some community amenities identified through some work sessions with community members and other organizations, jurisdiction partners as well. Those amenities included a grocery store, the area is lacking one, a cultural center, which really had us pause about this history and who would this center be for, by whom, and for whom. That really begged the question to do a deeper equity analysis. It's a concept that includes office space, both to provide potentially neighborhood institutions with office or classroom or clinic space, but also could buffer some of the traffic and noise and visuals coming off the Ross Island Bridge. The realignment creates an opportunity for a mural wall and a greenway along Grover Street. It's one idea that came to the surface, as well as festival streets on Woods and Grover between Nato and First, because those don't go through all the way to Nato. So there's an opportunity to rethink those. Here's some images of what that could look like. Here, again, existing conditions so radically different from what could be possible. This is on Nato at Woods facing southeast. Another image of the Festival Street concept on Woods between Nato and First Ave facing east. And these would require some zoning changes to make this vision possible. On the eastern sites, it's currently RM3, so you would have to at least look at a CM3 designation. So next steps for us are to revisit these concepts with the equity analysis in mind and working with the neighborhood association as well, and then to run some feasibility testing of them and include in the plan these conceptual renderings. Implementation looks like currently in a discussion with ODOT and TriMet and Metro through the Southwest Corridor process around an MOU of future publicly owned sites like the site and the Barber Transit Center. So that's some of the vehicles for implementation. Another vehicle for implementation is the TSP. The next slide is just a placeholder really for noting that this will include a list of streets that need classification changes. For example, Nato itself originally had been planned to receive the light rail investment. Now that it's on Barber, kind of rethinking its classification. And then there's new streets that are being created, which would need classifications as well. So what's next? Patrick, I think, is going to walk through community engagement.
Yeah, the community engagement effort for this project, and this is, the concept plan project, included 2 public open house events, individual meetings with NUNM and South Portland Neighbor Association, A third online public meeting is right now tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, October 20th. This briefing, and then we'll have other briefings with design and landmarks commissions. It's important to note that the level of interest in this project from the surrounding neighborhoods is very high. Even just as recent as last Sunday, I received 3 emails from South Portland neighborhood leaders asking me about this briefing. The neighborhood wants to be assured that a robust community engagement process will be a part of this plan as it moves forward. Neighborhoods, and I would like to let all commission members know that we're with them, and neighborhoods and stakeholders will help us create the community engagement strategy for this project as it moves forward.
And I won't reiterate that we're going to revisit these concepts and bring a discussion draft out to community for feedback before bringing it to you all. But that's kind of our major next steps for community engagement on the land use side.
And then lots of people ask, how is this going to happen? When is it going to happen? A lot of this, the speed of this hinges on the result of the vote in November. If the regional investment measure passes, this project becomes a high-profile, high-priority project for the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Starting January of 21, actually starting in December, we would make the moves to initiate the procurement of consultants to help us with the design and engineering to take this concept plan to 30, 60, 90% design and engineering drawings, and then construction documents. So with the goal of being under construction by 2024, if not sooner. So the idea is to get going as fast as we can to get this project moving forward. The regional investment measure does not pass. It doesn't mean that we're going to give up and walk away. We're going to start looking for other sources of funding, and federal grant funding could be a possible place to look for that. And that's convenient that this project will have environmental clearance through the federal environmental impact statement process related to the Southwest Corridor Light Rail project. So that helped us get the environmental clearances needed to make federal funding streams a possibility. So that's a venue, a place that we're going to start looking if the regional investment measure does not pass. And here we are at questions.
Thank you so much
For us.
that's a great introduction to the topic. I know I've got questions, and I think most everyone else will too. So let's start off with Chris and then Oriana after Chris. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you. I'm excited by this. I can remember working on the Barber concept plan more than a few years ago at this point, and sort of start to think about what could happen in this area. And it's really amazing to see the ideation that's gone on and what we're getting ready for. As a cyclist, frankly, the stretch of Nato between Barber and the Hawthorne Bridge is an area that I studiously avoid. Seeing this humanized and connected to better Nato is a really exciting opportunity. Question I have is, if I recall correctly, there's a significant frontage street along the east side of Nato, I think through the area near where the natural medicine school is. Are you going to ask us to vacate that at some point? What's going to happen to that?
Yeah, excellent question. So one of the things about working with this section of Nato Parkway is, for once, there is a lot of right-of-way to work with. Typically, we are trying to do a lot with a limited amount. So yes, there is a frontage road adjacent to National University of Natural Medicine. And right now, if say this project starts construction in 2024, upon opening in 2026, it could be that frontage road is still there. However, it is the vision of the land use plans and the intent is to get development up to the edges of Nato Parkway. So if there is a way to vacate that excess right of way and turn it into development parcels that could use the land a little more efficiently, however, and still provide the access and the circulation needed for the NUNM campus, that would certainly be a goal I think everyone would like to work to. But these are discussions that we need to work with NUNM hand in hand to make sure that everybody's on board as that kind of thing will move forward, because those frontage roads are critical right now to the operations of the NUNM campus.
Thank you.
Oriana.
Hi there. Thanks, Ryan and Patrick, for coming today and for providing a really exciting project. And apologies for the dryer in the background. But I've got 4 questions. I'll start with one and then give space for other folks and then circle back around. But the first is, you talked about this racial equity lens as part of the project. And I think, Ryan, you did a good job of explaining to a certain extent how it will be applied. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you can use upzoning or land use regulations to leverage these goals and create some of the public and community benefits you were talking about.
That is a big question, and every project is grappling with post comprehensive plan adoption with the new equitable development policies and anti-displacement policies that we try to incorporate into every plan. In this case, many of the sites we're looking at are publicly owned, and so there's leverage in that regard, going down the route of memorandums of understanding and development agreements that have that baked in. We have other tools, for example, as a preview for the West Portland Town Center, we're baking in a lot of those regulations, incentives, and requirements into a planned district with the zoning changes. We're not proposing a planned district here. We're proposing more kind of targeted rezoning, and so it's not really clear what are tools that you can put into legally into specific upzonings with parcel by parcel benefits, and so that's something we want to explore and come back to you with. We're currently, the equity analysis is trying to really clarify what are those benefits, and then is it more affordable housing? Is it affordable commercial space? Is it cultural space? Like what is it? And then we can look at kind of how zoning as a tool could be applied, or are we looking at subsidies or leveraging the publicly owned properties, or maybe a combination of all three, right? So a challenging question that we would come back to you with the plan having answered. Thanks for asking it.
And then I have a quick follow-up to that before I kick it maybe back to Eli to ask some of his questions, and before I ask my other two, which is there any right to return being considered for the communities that historically were present? And I can't remember, it was like a few hundred households who had been displaced in the initial development of this space.
Currently, the preference policy that the city has adopted is exclusive to Northeast. I think that's the kind of question that is going to be brought up through the equity analysis, and then we have to work with our partners at the Housing Bureau, talk to the city attorney, and see if that's a likely or even viable policy approach. But it's definitely, there's precedent for it. So especially given that the harm that's being redressed are the specific the families from those homes that were removed through urban renewal, and we have that same dynamic and history here too. So it seems like there's a similar logic behind that policy here.
Thank you. So I've got a couple questions. One of them is that slide you had where you showed the historical context map. I'm hoping you can just send me that full map, because I think it's something I've been trying to find for years, that old zoning map. So if you have it, I'd love to have that shared. My question is on, I couldn't tell from the navigation how bicycles would get around. And I biked over the Ross Island Bridge. It's kind of insane, but I wonder whether, I know that some of those streets feel very car dominant right now. and I'm hopeful that maybe when you get this back, or you could just show on one of your screens if that works, which of the streets in the new imagining would be car dominated still, versus which ones would be really friendly for bikes and peds. And the last question I have is on the Nato Parkway sketch that you shared. It looks to me like there's still 6 lanes with all that right of way, and I just wonder if we need 6 lanes on Nato in that stretch. So those are my questions. I'm not sure whether you want to try and take a stab at them now, or have that be feedback for when you come back.
I can quickly go over how this works for cyclists, and essentially, Better Nato. Be familiar with Better Nato along Nato Parkway in the downtown has a protected 2-way bike facility on the east side of Nato Parkway. So basically, what we would be, and that pretty much ends around Harrison and Maine. We would look to extend that through Nato and connect to Barber. So it would be a protected 2-way bike facility all the way from downtown to connect to Barber Boulevard. And then it would connect to the Barber Boulevard bike facilities that would be implemented as part of the Southwest Corridor Light Rail project. So essentially, so then Nato would be the main bike street in this area. There'd be local street connections, like say to Gibbs and to Whitaker and to Hooker on some of the side streets that go to, residential neighborhoods. But some of the other bigger streets like Kelly Avenue will still have bike lanes. However, the Ross Island Bridgehead will not have bike facilities. It doesn't have bike facilities today. It won't have bike facilities as a result of this plan. So yeah, the main thrust of the bike improvements is making that Barber to downtown connection by completing Better Nato.
Okay, thanks. Let's go to Ben and then Steph and then back to Oriana.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing. This is a very exciting project, and I think it's got a lot of potential in a very, very prominent location in town. My question is 2 parts. Are you still considering options at this point? It seems like what you have is a fairly clean, refreshingly simple solution, dare I say. And maybe if we can dig a little bit more into it, there seems to rely a lot on, a grade signalization. And I can't think of why that solution wasn't thought of before. And I think it probably had to do with traffic flow, being able to avoid intersections. So maybe if you can speak a little bit on that aspect too. How would it perform from a traffic standpoint?
Well, this great question. So the planning for this area and the traffic analysis has been done in conjunction with the Southwest Corridor project. So the environmental clearance, the environmental process for this Ross Island Bridgehead Nato Main Street project is all folded into the NEPA process for Southwest Corridor. So there, the FEIS traffic analysis tested this concept of removing the ramps and replacing it with the couplet and the streets. It appears to work as per the FEIS traffic analysis, but there's still a need to work out some details with ODOT on the final configuration. So largely the concept appears to work, but there's still some refinements that are and ongoing discussions that are happening.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's go to Steph.
Comment, question, comment, way to straighten out the spaghetti. Question about the community center. Has there been any conversation about what likely community opportunities there might be? Or is that part of the future community involvement process, and I reserve for a follow-up?
There are plenty of opinions. There's no consensus. There's consensus around greater access to places to gather that are indoors. and generally specificity around having kind of having cultural specificity in that space, who owns it, who operates it, but not real clarity about who that is, or how it would be funded, or how it would be developed and included in an overall master development. So currently just an idea similar to the grocery store or to live workspace, some of the other ideas that are involved in the concept currently. But yeah, open to iteration, and definitely there'll be plenty of opinions about its future if it stays in the concept.
And follow up, I understand South Portland has been having conversations around historic resources and historic narrative. And I'm wondering, especially, kind of going on to a little bit of Oriana's conversation about, right to return, or like honoring the historic narrative of communities in that area. I'm just curious if there's any opportunity for overlap there. Thank you.
Yeah, the community advisory group for the historic design guidelines update many of them there's a lot of overlap, right? They are highly involved in tracking this project, and we're part of the workshops that we did for the development concept, and we'll be part of the ones when we revisit it, and are very interested in some of the design features, both in terms of scale and massing and setbacks, but also in terms of how the story is told, right? Not only in the buildings themselves and in the open space and in the programming, like I mentioned, around the idea of a cultural center, but also even in how streets, how streets are designed and how streets are named. Even there's some interest in a variety of narrative telling of the history of this area. So all options are on the table and open to hearing planning commission's ideas or resources to explore, different strategies for telling that narrative.
Thank you. Oriana, you can take us home on this one.
All right, so these should be two quick ones. The first is, in your community engagement work, has there been any efforts to connect with folks who are unhoused in that area? I don't think, just in driving around, that there are a lot of folks, but it is a consideration. I wonder if it's been taken into account.
It is not. No, so thanks for flagging that.
And then the second question is, Patrick, I think you mentioned that neighborhood leaders were developing some support around what future community engagement would work, or how that would work. And apologies if I misheard or understood that, but my question would be, are there any resources being put on the table to value those folks who are supporting in that work for their time and their expertise?
Okay, two parts. One is the COVID pandemic really put a disruption in the flow of the project. So it has been a while since it was February when we last met or had a public meeting on the project. So it took us a while to regroup. And so although I have been able to attend a South Portland Neighborhood Association meeting online, we haven't had the kind of connection or communications that we had before. So getting to their question was, if this project moves forward, will there be a CAC, like a community advisory committee? Can there be focus groups? And absolutely, we can have both of those, all of them, as we would re-engage in a new effort that would go along with taking this project to the next level. And then the second part of your question was how, if any people's volunteer time can be compensated as part of the community engagement process. That's not something that we're doing right now, but it is something that we can look at as the project moves forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kat, got a question.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make it clear that I'm sitting here quietly, really enjoying your presentation. Appreciate all your work. I am not speaking up with questions just due to the fact that we have been assisting some property owners in that area on this work. So just felt it was best to stay quiet, but applaud all the efforts. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, with that, thank you so much, Patrick and Ryan, for sharing this with us. And we look forward to seeing you again when you get past the discussion draft stage.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.
All right, our next item is going to be the tree code update, and I will ask Emily Sandys to bring us up to speed on that so we can have our work session. Welcome.
Good evening. Can people hear me? Something's going on with my screen. Okay. So we're here tonight to have a little bit of a work session and hopefully get your recommendation on the proposed amendments to Title 11 related to trees and development situations. Just to recap where we're at, this is related to sections of Title 11 that require recommendations from both the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the Urban Forestry Commission. So we had briefed you on August 25th, and then you held a joint hearing with the Urban Forestry Commission on September 8th, and then testimony to the PSC was closed that Friday on September 11th. The Urban Forestry Commission continued their hearing to last Thursday, the 17th, and they made their recommendation on the proposal, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. So again, we would love to get your recommendation today. City Council is currently scheduled for October 29th. And just to reiterate, the staff recommendation, the staff proposal on these amendments was to remove exemptions from tree preservation and tree density regulations in the IG1, General Industrial 1, CX, and EX, Central Commercial, Central Employment Zones, but to retain those exemptions in the IH zone, heavy industrial, and also to reduce a key threshold for preservation of private trees so that trees are required to be preserved or pay a fee in lieu of preservation. And the fee in lieu of preservation changes to an inch per inch calculation, and that threshold would change from 36 inches to 20 inches. And then the staff proposal was also to re-examine the exemptions from tree preservation and tree density in the IH zone through the 5-year update to the economic opportunities analysis. In that forum, mitigating strategies may be established to offset the development constraints presented by adding tree preservation and tree density regulations in the IH zone. And as you recall, we had the analysis that we did found that we were, based on the analysis, we're short on industrial land supply if we remove either the tree preservation or tree density exemption in the IH zone. The Urban Forestry Commission last week recommended most of the staff proposal with the exception of retaining the exemptions in the IH zone. They instead are recommending to remove the exemptions from tree preservation and tree density in IH zone, as well as the exemptions in the other 3 zones and reducing that threshold to 20 inches. And just to recap, we have a lot of staff members that worked on this project, and most of them are here today if you have questions. So from Urban Forestry, Nick Desai and Brian Lando. Jen Cairo, the city forester, is not here, but she helped. From BPS, Sally Edmonds, Tom Armstrong, Jeff Cottle, Steve Kuntz. And then also from Bureau of Development Services, I should have mentioned that I'm Emily Sandy from the Bureau of Development Services, Kim Talent. And then also, I believe we have Bruce Nelson here from the Urban Forestry Commission as a resource. And I'm not sure, Daniel Newberry, I'm not sure if he's here, but he was another person that has been a resource for you. So I will turn that over to you, Eli, unless there are questions.
Sorry, thank you. And thanks for bringing the team with you. We had it was going to be a 2x2 between the PSC and the Urban Forestry Commission. It ended up being a 3x1. So Mike, Steph, and I powwowed with Dan Newberry, but with Bruce Nelson here, that makes it 3-2 at least. So we're getting closer to parity. So I would like to, this is one of the shorter code amendments we've had in front of us in terms of text, but it's definitely raised a lot of questions. So I guess I'm just going to put it open to PSC members. I should say first, we did come out of that 2x2 with some potential amendment language. So that's been emailed out. And we also had some discussions about what might be in our accompanying letter. But we didn't pin it down, and that doesn't exactly align with what the Urban Forestry Commission just voted on at their most recent meeting. So let's just kick it around for comments, just to share your initial thoughts on this code update, and then we'll try and narrow it into something we might be able to approve and send on. So Kat, your hand's up either from before or this time. Uh-oh, caught ya. Anyone else want to jump in with comments on this code? Mike is volunteering to break the ice. Thanks.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've been talking about Goal 9 and these issues for a long time, and I'm curious from staff. My understanding is there are all kinds of proposals for changing use on a number of sites that are currently IH zoned. For example, Terminal 2, we keep hearing about ball fields and commercial and residential development. The Port of Portland, I think it's Terminal 4, is right now talking about designating a portion of that at least for drone training, and arguing that it's a river-dependent use. There have been some major changes in the past, the Cascade, Terminal 1, and so forth. So what's the city's position on all these proposals? And I think Zeidel's got some plans afoot as well, and these are all industrial lands, and we've got a shortage. How are we going to deal with those? I'm just curious.
Yeah, hi, this is Tom Armstrong from BPS. With any of those proposals to sort of convert industrial land to some other non-industrial use, they're going to face the same policy questions and the same Goal 9 bar as these tree code changes face, and that we're talking about today. And that's sort of what we're building into the scenario phase of the EOA, is where we look at those trade-offs and what those development industrial capacity impacts might be from those conversions and what that means in terms of economic opportunity. But until the EOA update is finished and goes through that scenario process, those projects they face the same sort of situation Title 11 does, and it's up to them to figure that out. We have not had any specific discussions about how to do that for the Terminal 2 baseball stadium. We've incorporated some impact analysis into the Montgomery Park streetcar study, but no specific recommendations have been advanced there. The drone facility at Terminal 4 is relatively new to us. We haven't had any conversations with the Port of Portland about those impacts. So I think all of those conversion proposals are pretty uncertain and haven't even advanced as far as the Title 11 impacts have. And they face the same Goal 9 questions that we're looking at today.
Thank you, Bob.
And I've got a second one, and we've talked about this, Tom, in the past. Metro Well, I'm interested in what the timeline is for Metro to do the next analysis where they assign goals to each of the jurisdictions in the region. And to me, again, given that we're basically out of land, what's the prospect for actually revisiting Portland's fair share of industrial jobs based on Metro's regional analysis? And doesn't it make, well, I'll just say, to me, it makes more sense to address this issue on a regional basis, not jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. Metro in 2018 adopted a regional growth forecast that takes us out to 2040 for both jobs and households. They are in the final step of allocating that regional forecast down to the jurisdiction level. But when they do that allocation, it's basically Portland, we expect you to accommodate 90,000 jobs. But as Metro likes to say, they are not subject to the Goal 9 requirements for their regional planning work. And so it's not that, oh, gee, Portland, we think you need 20,000 additional industrial jobs. The Metro coordination is really with that larger number. And so as part of the EOA process, that's where Goal 9 sort of allows the city to essentially create their economic vision. And it becomes up to us in looking at our various policies, and that's where the policy trade-offs occur as to if we get that allocation that, say, it's 90,000 job allocation from Metro, what types of jobs do we, City of Portland, think those are going to turn into consistent with our development capacities, consistent with our policies on economic prosperity, climate change, urban heat islands, natural resource protections. And that's sort of those balancing and trade-offs will get worked out through this scenario alternatives look as part of the EOA update.
Thank you. I'll go now to Oriana, and then I'll probably share my thoughts and then see who else is next. So Oriana.
Yeah, I wanted to start before I jump into kind of the meetup policy with an apology, because I think the last time we had our session, there were some things that I don't think I said the way I intended to, and just want to appreciate Steph and Kat for kind of showing more appreciation for industrial jobs than I think I did in terms of the way I worded content. So I just want to throw that apology out to my fellow commissioners and to anybody else who's listening at the time or followed up and felt like I didn't show proper appreciation for jobs that are very good wage jobs for community members. I think what I had intended to get at there, though, is are we creating limitations in our thinking about what middle wage jobs can be for BIPOC communities? And making sure that we're thinking expansively and also weighing the ways in which we are kind of pitting jobs against climate or jobs against community and pitting two values of, do people want to live in communities where there are trees and there aren't the adverse effects of urban heat islands, or do communities want to live in communities where there are middle wage jobs that are more accessible to BIPOC communities? And I worry that we're often faced with those kind of false dilemmas. And that when we think about like the Goal 9 issue that's coming up, we don't have a state land use goal that addresses climate. We don't have a state land use goal that addresses equity. So that even in the analysis Tom was just describing and weighing those other factors, they can't be weighed in the same weight that Goal 9 is. And I think that's an unfortunate reality that we're facing in this work. That I find really, really frustrating, especially just, again, spending so much time in the Cully community, which is has so few trees in nature, and just seeing the way that impacts community and talking to community members who I think want to see good economic opportunities, but also want neighborhoods that are really livable and should have a right to both things. And we should be able to pass good policy in this space that allows that. So I'm struggling with the IH exemption. While I think other commissioners have expressed really good reasons why we might not want to be so aggressive in that regard, or may want to try to weigh that for the future. I do worry that when we kind of kick the can in a way that is intended to support community in the future, those are often promises that are never fulfilled because other things get in the way or new projects come up. And I worry that when we have the opportunity to do something that could be really transformational for community and we don't take that, that risks this never happening or not having this opportunity again in the future. So I just hope we can kind of weigh that case here. And then again, weigh that jobs will change in the future, that there will be new opportunities, but the quality of communities and the quality of communities specifically with regard to Heat Island and the adverse effects that can come up there, that's not something that will change in the future unless we act now. So I just want to kind of show what I'm grappling with in this moment and hope we can have some more robust discussion that can maybe guide me towards more clarity about where I think we should go. So thanks all.
Thank you. Well, I'll say where I'm grappling also. I have a strong belief that the tree protection should apply in the IH zones. So for me, it is a question of timing. And I appreciate the kick the can down the road concern. I also have a concern, though, that in front of us right now is a proposal the staff can defend to apply the tree protection in all these other zones. But staff doesn't have findings that they feel comfortable with to support it in the IH zones right now, which is disappointing, but it's the reality in front of us. And so I have no concern about the city being sued on a project. My concern is the city being sued and then losing, and they knew they were going to lose anyway, and everything else stalls out in the meantime. So I have a inclination to think that the discussion that we need to have to make sure we don't pit jobs against climate and against community is probably a discussion for the EOA. It's a year and a half out. There's no assurance of what the outcome would be. That's unfortunate, but it does go through the Planning Sustainability Commission, and I think we would have representation in that process. So I would probably try and take the bird in hand of applying the treat code to the 3 new zones, but leave IH out as staff has recommended. And then there's a third route also I'll mention, which is for staff to try and come up with a middle ground of level of protection for the IH zone that they can defend. And that might be a good approach, but I have a little concern on that end too, that maybe it becomes very weak sauce protection. And if the city adopts it, then that is all the protection we ever get for the IH zones, where we might have gotten more if we'd waited for the EOA. And I guess my last thought on the EOA is that it's not just tree protection. We've got wetlands, we have environmental zones, we have many other things that are hung up with the same goal 9 issue. So this is part of that bundle. So I'm gonna pass it. Do you wanna do a quick response, Oriana, or should I go over now?
Yeah, I just had a quick question for staff that was spurred by what you just said, which is that would it be possible and maybe legally defensible to create an exception or to the exemption for proximity to BIPOC communities? Because we can look at the census tracts and really get a sense of who is living near where some of these IH zones are. And I think, just remembering the map that was shown last time around, that jogs my memory about some of the communities I think I was most specifically worried about. So the question for staff is, is there a way to create some bounds around that exemption so that as we kick it out to the EOA for this bigger philosophical conversation, we can at least create immediate protections for the BIPOC communities that I think we're all really concerned about in this case?
That's a good question. And, applying the regulations to certain geographic areas, whether it's proximity to BIPOC communities or areas with especially low tree canopy or whatever, is a potential outcome. However, it would require, again, some analysis to figure out what those geographies would be that would allow us to move forward without not complying with Goal 9. So I see that as a possibility more for discussion under the EOA. If we're running up against a wall again, or need to come up with some more creative thinking there.
Thank you, Emily. Katie, and then after Katie, it will be Chris. Katie.
Yeah, I'm pretty much sticking with what I had said last time, but I figured it's probably a good thing to say it again. I just have known for a long time that those industrial lands are middle-wage jobs, and that they're kind of endangered. And Oriana, you did bring up a good point. You don't really know what the future is going to bring in terms of what jobs are going to look like. But if there aren't, or if there isn't any place to have those jobs, then there won't be. One of the things that I was thinking about was how the fact that we're looking at the tree code is kind of pitting trees against, these industrial jobs, rather than, because it's just trees or, trees or no trees is what this plan is about. And that's why I'm really actually very interested in the EOA, because I'm interested in those trade-offs and what really makes sense for the city of Portland. I also really like the idea that people would have opportunities in Portland that would cover the broad spectrum of what people do in life. I think it makes the city a little weaker when it doesn't have the different kinds of people and the different kinds of jobs that are out there. So, that's sort of a philosophical thing that I have, but that's where I'm at. I'm still thinking the EOA is the better place to look at that, and I'm supporting that position.
Chris, thank you, Kate.
Like my colleagues, I'm frustrated. I floated some amendment concepts to staff that would try to navigate around some of these restrictions, and pretty much the city attorney shot them all down. So I think I'm probably going to land in the place where this needs to happen in EOA, but I want to really put a stake in the ground that we have to have some very high expectations of the EOA. The state land use hierarchy does a great job of pitting jobs against the environment. And I think we know that that's not the path forward to use that kind of paradigm. We need to get to a Green New Deal in order to preserve the climate and a lot of climate resiliency features that we're going to need in this region. And I think we need to set the expectation that the EOA has to be a key vehicle for getting us there. And we should probably think beyond Portland and think about what's happening at a state level. My understanding is that LCDC, Land Conservation Development Commission, is taking a serious look at what the governor's executive order means for them from a climate point of view. I would hope that perhaps we can be a partner with them in rethinking what the structure of goals is, so that we have things like a climate goal and an equity goal that Oriana mentioned. I think we shouldn't assume that we're going to take the current state of state law all the way through the EOA process. I think we should be thinking about how we can exert influence to modify that and get us all to better outcomes. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to interject a quick question for staff, because maybe others have it. I understand that the PSC has a role in the EOA process. Does EOA need to go through the PSC to make it to City Council as zoning code updates do? Or are we just one of multiple parties informing it?
No, the EOA is a background document to the comprehensive plan, and as such, it goes through the PSC to make a recommendation to City Council before it gets adopted.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Steph. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I went out of order. You're right, Mike.
Okay, yeah, actually, the frustration is not putting it too weakly, in my opinion. I'm incredibly frustrated with this process. And actually, getting back to the land use program, goal 5, which involves natural resources, actually it's kind of a catch-all goal. Every time we try to pass some new regulations to protect natural resources, you have to go through an EC analysis, which includes the economic analysis. So natural resources takes it in the shorts in many regards through that goal 5 planning process, which never guarantees anything's going to be protected necessarily. And then along comes goal 9, which trumps everything, which is that's just a comment based on many years of involvement in land use planning. Bruce Nelson is here from the Urban Forestry Commission. Would it be acceptable for me to ask Bruce a question?
Oh, sure.
In terms of their rationale? Because if any group would be concerned about, and I absolutely agree with you, Eli, that is a huge concern of mine as well, that we tie up all the other things related to the decision we're going to make, through some legal challenge. Surely the Urban Forestry Commission gave that a lot of thought, and yet still suggested removing the exemption from I-8. So I'm just curious if Bruce could shed a little light on the conversation he and his colleagues had in terms of being concerned about tying things up.
Oh, you ask hard questions. We went back and forth. Let's see, how do I want to phrase this? I think the overriding, what was driving us to our decision was actually a sense of urgency that we don't expect City Council to make the decision to remove the exemption from industrial lands. We don't expect that. But we thought we needed to stand up and say, that has to change. Figure out a way to make that change. Figure out a timeline that works for today's situation. We understand perfectly well the EOA has certain parameters they need to use or certain analysis they have to do, and it's based on decisions that were made in the past, under conditions that existed in the past. We understand that. And legally, that's what needs to happen. That doesn't mean we accept that. So that was, our decision was more, I'll say it's on ethical grounds, not on legal grounds. We understand that we probably don't, what staff did, they needed to do. We just don't agree with the decision and the consequences in the short term. What we're talking about is the next 2 years, probably industrial lands, they will do what they do. Hopefully that will change after the new EOA. I guess we were saying we're going to say no now. We don't expect to win this one. There wasn't much discussion of thinking that this would potentially throw the whole Title 11 code into court. We weren't expecting that as a consequence. That could be our naivete, I don't know. But so it was our decision to go that way. I had actually made a motion to just approve what the staff recommended. And we were hemming and hawing, and I withdrew the motion because it didn't look like it was even worth the vote. So.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Representing the range of takes on the commission. So somehow Oriana looks like she's jumped ahead of Steph, but I remember Steph being there. So I'm going to say Steph and then Oriana.
Well, it sounds like we are near united in frustration, which I also share. And I think the question for me is, well, to start, I appreciate others having said, and I agree, like this false choice between climate and jobs. I believe it is a false choice. I recently heard a quote, I can't attribute it with apologies, but there are no jobs on a dead planet. So I've come to, like, my frustration comes down to, like, what is bold and what is enduring? And I think the enduring part is going to the EOA. And how bold can we be up to that point, recognizing that I think that the larger changes, the larger conversations I'm hearing, and I agree to the extent that I'm hearing that we want to have will happen through the EOA. And I think it's really important that we strongly word a timeline for the EOA. I also share, what we say will happen later tends to not happen all too often, and I would like to see that happen on a specific timeline, an aggressive timeline, so that we can start having different conversations.
Thank you. Oriana.
I just noticed that Andrea put her hand up, so I want to give space there if that's a direct response or thought before I jump in with some questions about the EOA.
Sorry, thank you, Oriana. I just want to kind of acknowledge the frustration that's been expressed by a couple of our commission members, and the work that we're doing on the EOA is underway. It's part of our work program right now, so obviously it will take time, but I do think that it is the prudent route to address what I think will be a very different EOA process, which is how are we looking at really how to integrate our goals and not pit trees, climate against jobs. Like, how are we really taking a more integrated approach, and also thinking more about the kind of future of the kind of good quality middle income jobs that we need to generate and develop in the city. So I just want to acknowledge that it feels like kicking the can down the road, but that can is actually underway. We're doing the work, and I'm really pleased that there is kind of a new coalition of community organizations that really want to engage in this. The mayor convened a meeting with a new coalition called the Braided Rivers Coalition that wants to engage with us on the EOA process, and I think will be really important, really helpful to lead to a better result. So I just want to kind of provide a little bit more assurances that this is part of our work program, and I think there will be more community engagement involvement than we've seen in the past.
Thank you, Andrea. Oriana.
That was a perfect segue into my question, which was going to be, what does community engagement look like for the EOA? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what organizations are part of that coalition, how community engagement will work. Will the CIC receive a briefing soon about the EOA so that it can provide some perspective early in the process? Like, I think before I'm willing to agree to let's wait into the EOA, because I think we're hanging a lot on that right now. And I trust the potential good work of staff, but it always makes me nervous to hang a lot on some future potential thing that could happen when there is opportunity to take action now. And, as someone who works in climate policy, we have to weigh that all the time. And like to Steph's point about the dead planet, and also just thinking about just transition issues as well, which is that there's this idea in climate policy that we know we have to transition workers to new jobs, that those jobs are at risk with some of the potential policies that we make, but that we can build in a just transition element. So two questions kind of coming about in a roundabout way is, one, just tell me a little bit more about the community engagement that is shaping up. And then second, like, what elements of a just transition will be part of that, of like really bridging the gap and to stop kind of that tension between climate and jobs.
Yep. Make sure I'm muted. So the coalition, it's a new coalition that's formed, as I understand it, and we're happy to share the letter that we recently received, or the mayor and the commissioners received. It includes a number of climate justice, environmental justice organizations that have been working on Superfund cleanup, conservation organizations. So it's a broad kind of coalition of organizations who really want to fossil fuel issues, fossil fuel infrastructure. So it's a broad coalition of groups that really want to engage in this, and they see the opportunity that we do, which is, how are we setting the course forward for kind of a green economy? We will be working regularly with that coalition of organizations, and honestly, we're just we're mapping out the community engagement process. So happy to share more once we have kind of that plan together with Commission. Your question about the CIC, as you know, because you're a representative there, has limited bandwidth in terms of the projects that they engage in, and I think they're in the process right now of selecting those projects. So I don't know if this is on the list. We'll have to check on that to find out if this is on the list. and Joe may have more to add to that.
Joe, do you want to jump in, and then I'll give it to Kat?
Yeah, I'll be real brief. This concern about this pitting too much of the response on a future project, I share, because we've been through it, and it can take a lot longer and it cannot happen. But this one, we know we need, and we actually started it in advance, started it this year and into part of last year, because we saw these natural resources, especially in the Columbia Corridor, part of the industrial area, that we know we need to protect. And we've been through this enough with the state land use system that to land the protection of those natural resources, we have to have an EOA, and the city itself is going to have to make some decisions. One version of doing this is, and the EOA itself is just a tool in the overall city's economic development strategy, right? Like, we have lots of things that we want to accomplish, and this whole description of the more green and equitable economy is one that the Braided Rivers Coalition and others are putting on the table. And then there's the more traditional kind of concerns as well. And economic development, the role of land use in economic development policy is pretty small, honestly. It has to do with a lot of other things, including workforce development and the like. So in addition to the EOA, which is just the land use piece, the cities in the region are going to update their economic development strategy. So a lot of the energy and attention about how we become this other economy will likely need to focus and be focused on that process. And the EOA is there to serve, to help advance whatever strategy it is. But really, we just need a revised forecast that says we're not growing in this category of jobs, or growing in that category of jobs, and that we think through either policy or the nature of these, that switch, we still can provide living wage opportunities for people with less credential, less education. So we can get the EOA part of this done. Hopefully it will sync up with the strategy so that these bigger issues can also be deliberated at the time. But we're also hedging our bets so that we can move forward with an EOA, even if those other processes get resolved or get delayed, because what we're after is a pretty discrete piece of change about those natural resources that we want to protect, including trees.
Kat, was yours a follow-up to Oriana, or Mike was the next in line if it was different?
It was actually a follow-up question to Andrea's comment about the community engagement. Is that okay if I proceed?
Yeah, thanks. And then after that, I got Mike, and then I've got Chris. So.
And perhaps I missed it, so I apologize, Andrea, if I did. But what I didn't hear in your list of organizations that you've reached out to is how to actually have a conversation with the community members who are actually the laborers, and whether it be the actual unions themselves, which I think is one avenue, but I think there's a very different avenue that takes it out of the union realm and tries to actually get into the community and talk with them about those jobs. And maybe, like I said, maybe you said that and I just missed it, but I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think that that is what I said was we actually haven't fully developed our community engagement plan yet, but working with both reaching out and engaging both union laborers and the companies themselves will all be a part of that, and different associations. I just wanted to speak to I think the concern that some of the commission members were raising about community organizations and their involvement. So we will be sure to share our community engagement plan with you all to seek your input and feedback as well.
Okay, thanks. Mike?
Yeah, well, it's been mentioned several times. The EOA is going to focus on more than trees. We've got floodplain issues and wetland issues. Joe, can you remind us what's on the plate right now as far as natural resource projects that are ongoing?
Well, yeah, just in Columbia Corridor, Mike, we have the E-zones. And the E-zones in the Columbia Corridor, they're based on our new data. They're new inventory, so they're science-based, and they're about the slough a lot and those other kind of contributing streams. But we can't even move that part of the E-zone forward. That's why we're breaking it up into phases. You're doing one phase now. We need the EOA to do that. And the total number of acres that are tied up in the potential E-zone expansions or remappings is it's less than 100, I think. Sally, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's much more than trees. Trees was like 10-ish, 10 to 20 acres. And then the new delineated wetlands that are locally delineated wetlands that are also BES has been working on in the slough could affect a couple hundred acres. So it's big natural resources. And it's natural resources of the scale that I think is responsive to these climate concerns you all are raising and that we're seeing. And so we're just trying to move ahead with the analysis to be able to document it, defend it, and get those resources protected, and also, deliver on the other sort of facts we have to compile to be able to make the economic policy decisions as well. So there's a lot, Mike, at stake on the Columbia Corridor. And that's why we're so maybe a little bit overly focused on just keeping this moving so we can get there to be able to do that.
Yeah, so a question I have is, there are those specific projects, but if we're really serious about addressing climate adaptation, for example, and mitigation, I could imagine that the Citizen Advisory Committee might come up with other ideas in terms of what sort of natural resources need to be protected, or in the case of urban forest canopy, for example, is the 33% target really realistic given what we now know about urban heat islands and so forth? So my question is, do you envision the opportunity for folks in that coalition to bring up other issues that need to be looked at as well?
I fully expect the coalition to do that. They're as much interested in the north reach of the river plan as they are in the tree, these other things we just described. So there's bigger prizes that they have in mind. And all I can say is this, is that we all absolutely need to do the right thing. And we need to think strategically about what we're going to be able to defend, because it's not just part of what happens in the EOA that's different than where we are now is that we actually have to document in a defensible way that gets through the state evidence standards the kind of benefits we're asserting that we know will come with protecting these resources or increasing tree canopy, and the kind of benefits that come from that to specific populations. Like anything we're asserting in our reasoning through of these decisions, when we're playing this when we're getting through this gauntlet of the state land use law decision in this regard, we got to provide the evidence as well. And that's a whole nother field of analysis we haven't quite scoped yet. So the more expansive we get, the more of that evidence we need, and the harder it can become to move in a timely way. That's the kind of things that we'll all need to get our head around when we get there. But the intent is to move on those natural resources and the economic issues. It could expand to something that takes longer. We'll have to decide if it's worth doing that or breaking it into phases. That's all that down the road stuff, right?
Well, and ultimately, I still think we need to be very serious about pushing back on the state, the planning program, and also engaging with Metro on the next analysis.
Agree.
Go to Chris, and then I'm going to jump in after Chris.
So I'm going to grasp at a straw here. I don't necessarily expect to be successful, but it will raise an interesting point. I recall when we did the current EOA, one of the significant decisions that this body had to make was to figure out which marine freight forecast to adopt. We were presented with high, medium, low options for the marine freight forecast. And we took a fair amount of grief from a number of different directions when we picked the medium forecast. We were described as being pessimists. I think in hindsight, the reality is that the outcome is a lot closer to the low forecast. Is there any way we could amend the current EOA to recognize, the facts on the ground on that, and would that create any breathing room to slip in a few more trees?
Well, I'm going to let Tom talk about the marine forecast because we need to update that. And it is, you're remembering accurately, Chris. There's a policy decision that we made then that we make differently now. And also within the EOA, there's a lot of assumptions about how many jobs are produced by new development per acre, right? That's built on a model of what those industries are about. That what we're seeing now is a lot of logistics facilities that may not be delivering that level of employment per square foot of facility or land. And so we need to update that assumption too. That's part of recalibrating the whole package. And I don't know, Tom, you want to talk about marine?
Well, I think it sort of that sort of change is in the same boat as what Oriana was suggesting about looking at buffer zones along that industrial neighborhood edge. Is we have this request mandate by city council to deliver a project by the end of the calendar year and enable them to have a decision. To be able to look at what are our trends and how we're performing and amend the EOA and get all of that evidence in a way that council could make that decision. We just simply cannot get that done by the end of the year. So which one do you want to give? Do you want an interim solution and keep working on it and continue to talk about this next spring when we have to do a similar level of analysis for that interim solution as we do for the EOA update? And it's just a question of staff resources and timing.
Okay, I'll let go of the straw. Thank you.
I want to appreciate that was a great idea and the benefit of having continuity, long-term folks on this commission to remember back that far. Mike, is your hand up again?
Yeah, it is.
Go for it.
Actually, I remember that process very well as well. The issue I raised earlier in terms of all the proposals that are coming out for ball fields and all kinds of uses on that industrial land, to me, is a really important point to take into consideration, because that land is laying vacant for years and years. And the fact that the port is talking about using a big part of Terminal 4 for drone training just speaks to how little development is actually has gone in on those lands.
So this is another straw I'll grasp at, and it may not have any legs, but I've heard from staff and from fellow commissioners the frustration with some state land use goals from DLCD. Is there precedent, or is it appropriate for us to pile on with a letter to them? I mean, the city I know has sort of a laundry list of changes they'd like at the state level. It doesn't feel like we as a planning commission should be stuck in this position that we're in now, and maybe we'll be again. And there is a role for the PSC in state level advocacy. Tom?
I will say that it just so happens that this Thursday at the LCDC meeting, they are actually starting a rural advisory committee to look at climate-friendly cities and equitable development that may actually result in some changes, at least to their rules, if not the statewide planning goals. I think what we could do is look to see how that process unfolds and look for opportunities for the commission to weigh in or work with government relations, the city's government relations office, to forward comments into that process to make sure it gets shaped and comes out in a way that helps us better balance these goals and sync them up better.
Okay, thanks. Oriana.
Yeah, I'll just say to that end that there's a very good chance that the PSC will have a direct link to that RAC. And at least in my day job capacity, Verde has been providing some support for DLCD in that entire process. So I'm pretty in the loop and maybe more in the loop soon.
Thank you. Mike, is your hand up?
Yep.
Okay.
Once again. Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I think we should be engaged, and that's part and parcel to our decision to be more proactive and advocates. And I want to make it very clear, I totally support the land use planning program. However, there are these vagaries that pop up and almost always winds up with less natural resource protection. And so to the extent we can de-engage, I really would encourage that.
Well, I've not seen more hands come up. I'm wondering whether we can get ourselves towards making a recommendation. There is one idea in front of us, which is the draft language that as a potential amendment that I believe had staff support, which I'm wondering, well, first off, should I read that or have people seen it? Let me raise your hand if you'd like it read to you as just one idea that could potentially go in. Okay, thanks. It's pretty short. So this is a little bit of a stretch. We haven't done this before, but to actually bake a directive into this code recommendation going to City Council. And we've been coached, preceding this with a little caution, is that our hands are tied. We cannot force City Council's hand for a decision down the road. So you'll see some language that's not quite as strong as you might think, but that's because we can't bind a future City Council on decisions right now. So the language says, City Council should direct via ordinance BPS to evaluate the Title 11 tree preservation and density exemptions for the heavy industrial IH zone as part of the economic opportunity analysis update, consistent with city goals, including those related to tree canopy, climate change, and urban heat islands. The economic opportunities analysis should also consider equitable public health and environmental outcomes for BIPOC communities living adjacent to or employed within the IH zone. So that came out of sort of the 2x2, whatever we call it, as one potential way to accompany staff's recommendation with some direction on how to undertake the EOA. Would anybody like to comment on that or move it to be included as part of whatever our decision?
I'll move it.
Okay, Mike's motion. Would someone like to second that for inclusion?
Second.
Second from Chris, thanks. Any discussion? Okay, well, let's take a vote on bundling this into the package. Can I get, I'm not sure if it's Julie or somebody else.
JP.
JP will do it? Okay, thanks. JP, welcome.
Hi.
Can you call our names in order, of some order?
Of some order, okay. I will call your names in the order that I have here. So, Commissioner Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauk.
Yes.
Commissioner Larcell.
Yes.
Commissioner Magnera.
Yes.
Commissioner Rout.
Yes.
Commissioner Schultz.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
And Commissioner Spivak.
Yes. So that was approved unanimously and is now part of the package. Any other discussion on the package? Any other amendments? Or would someone like to make a motion?
Well, for purpose of advancing the discussion, I'll move that we forward the staff recommendation as amended to City Council.
Okay.
I'll second.
I didn't actually see who said that. Is that Steph? No? Oh, Kat, thank you. Okay, Kat seconded it. So any discussion on the full package? I'm not hearing discussion. If I believe if I'm following order right, we would now take a vote on it. So let us vote on the package. And after we vote, if it passes, then we should discuss what goes in the letter to City Council. But let's find out if that happens first. So JP, your turn again.
All right. Commissioner Bortolazzo.
Yes.
Commissioner Hauk.
Yes.
Commissioner Larcell.
Yes.
Commissioner Magnera.
Yes.
Commissioner Routh.
Yes.
Commissioner Schultz.
Yes.
Commissioner Smith.
Yes.
And Commissioner Spivak.
Yes. Well, the motion passes unanimously to recommend this forward to City Council. And I will say that having attended the UFC meeting, there was conjecture that this may be what happens, that we have different recommendations from the two bodies, and they expected that might happen. So I'm going to shift the conversation now to see if there's any additional things we should include in our correspondence to City Council to accompany this recommendation. And maybe if people have particular interest in being involved in the in the economic opportunities analysis process, which is starting already, this is a chance to sort of say, yes, I'd like to be involved in that in some way. So any thoughts on either of those? Katie.
Yeah, I think I told you before, but I hadn't said it out in this forum that I would be interested in being involved in the EOA process.
Okay. Okay. I see Chris and then Oriana, and I think I saw Steph's real hand. So Chris.
Well, I'm just going to suggest that we should have firm and expansive language in the letter about what we expect from the EOA beyond just the tree issue. I think this is, our opportunity to put our stake in the ground for what we think needs to be in there. And I'm, open to a long list of those thoughts that others may have. And while I would love to be involved in the EOA, I think it's not going to conclude until after I've left this body, so I will leave it to other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Oriana.
I'd also like to volunteer to engage more in the EOA space. And I think my request for a letter, and perhaps this is already how it will be captured, but I think really highlighting the tensions we were grappling with. And I think how just that kind of frustration that was felt by many members, which then speaks to why the EOA needs to be really effective and needs to be expansive in the way that Chris was describing.
All right, thank you. Steph.
Yes to all of that. I would love, to the extent that it's not too onerous, to also be part of the EOA. Great.
Thank you. Mike.
Yep, and I'm up for participating in the EOA process as well. Even though, as Chris said, I may be gone. Before the end, I want to be involved.
Well, we know through the public outreach, there'll be many ways to participate in the EOA process, those serving on the PSC and many others as well. So I think that wraps up this discussion from us. So thank you, everyone, for participating in it. Thank you for representatives of staff. Great job on this project. We asked you to do this about a year ago when we had the tree code in front of us before, just for a little extension, and then somehow that scope expanded. So we are recommending tree protections in many new zones through the process. And thank you, Bruce, for joining in, representing your commission. Going over to Mike and then Andrea. Mike?
No.
Hand was up. Andrea?
Yeah.
Eli, did you want to have a conversation about the letter and any kind of messages you want to incorporate in the transmission letter?
I don't. Are you asking me?
I'm asking you and the commission if there's.
The commission. Yeah, I tried to do a little go around to solicit input. We got some ideas for it, which I share that what I've heard so far of covering not just the tree code, but other demands on that type of land, and the tension that the frustration we run into based on the state process. Are there any other things that should be added on? I mean, I think we should have something about our support for lowering the diameter to 20 inches, which is pretty substantive. So we shouldn't lose track of the that part of this code update.
Right.
Okay. So that will wrap up today's meeting. I want to give a little heads up for folks who have already responded. And some of you might not have. The upcoming projects are going to be historic resources, and Julie put a call out for those who want to get paper copies of that. So if you would like that and haven't already asked, please let her know. And then also coming up is the Housing Continuum project, and the discussion draft for that is not out yet, but apparently it's going to be out fairly soon. So we have those projects coming to us in the next few months. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.